Good morning, children, and welcome back to the digital classroom of Vikram Juneja. In this particular video, we are going to do a short story, A Horse and Two Goats by R.K. Narayan. R.K. Narayan is a very famous Indian author who is well known for Malgudi Days, which was telecast on Doordarshan in 1980s. This short story has around 14 pages, and children are normally found reluctant to read the story because of its length. But let me tell you that once you read it and once you understand R.K. Narayan, you'll feel like reading more often. That's the stature of R.K. Narayan as a writer.
R.K. Narayan was an Indian writer who is best remembered for his stories set in the fictional South Indian town of Malgudi. You must have all seen Malgudi Days, for which he is very popular. This is something which was telecast in the 1980s on Doordarshan. Narayan's style of writing is very simple, easy and unpretentious, and his stories explore with humor and compassion the everyday lives of ordinary people are also explored in these stories. The following story is an edited version of his short story, A Horse and Two Goats. In it, Narayan describes what happens when an English-speaking American meets an illiterate South Indian villager who knows only Tamil and has never stepped outside his village. The foreigner with his English is baffled by the incomprehensible and bizarre behavior of Muni, while Muni is equally mystified by the American's strange words and antics. Using the simplest of settings, Narayan has crafted a sensitive yet amusing story rich in situational comedy. Let's go about reading the story. A Horse and Two Goats. Of the 700,000 villages dotting the map of India, Kritam was probably the tiniest, indicated on the district survey map by a microscopic dot. But its size did not prevent its giving itself the grandiose name Kritam, which meant in Tamil coronet or crown on the brow of this subcontinent. The village consisted of less than 30 houses, only one of them built with brick and cement. Painted a bright yellow and blue all over with gorgeous carvings of gods and gargoyles on its balustrade, it was known as the Big House. The other houses, distributed in 4 streets, were generally of bamboo thatch, straw, mud and other unspecified material. Muni's was the last house on the 4th street, beyond which stretched the fields. In his prosperous days, Muni had owned a flock of 40 sheep and goats and sallied forth every morning, driving the flock to the highway a couple of miles away. There he would sit on the pedestal of a clay statue of a horse while his cattle grazed around. He carried a crook at the end of the bamboo pole and snapped foliage from the avenue trees to feed his flock. He also gathered faggots and dry sticks, bundled them and carried them home for fuel at sunset. His wife lit the domestic fire at dawn, boiled water in a mud pot, threw it into it a handful of millet flour, added salt and gave him his first nourishment for the day. When he started out, she would put in his hand a packed lunch, once again the same millet cooked into a little ball, which he could swallow with a raw onion at midday. His fortunes had declined gradually unnoticed. From a flock of 40 which he drove on into a pen at night, his stock had now come down to the 2 goats, which were tethered to the trunk of a drumstick tree which grew in front of his hut and from which occasionally Muni could shake down drumsticks. So, in the introduction, R.K. Narayan has presented that there are 700,000 villages in the entire India, and this village is a tiny dot on the map of India. Though if you see the name of this village, Kritham, Kritham means coronet in Tamil or crown. And crown, is very, very important because a king is acknowledged with the crown he wears. So Kritham is a crown on the map of India, but then unlike the name, Kritham has nothing significant to talk about. It has a protagonist who is also very, very poor. Though in his old days, this man was good enough in his financial condition. He had a flock of 40 sheep and goats, and he used to actually take pride in grazing those sheep and goats, and he would do that every single day. But with the passage of time, he was unfortunate enough to actually come down to 2 goats. The food which he would be served by his wife was a handful of millet flour, salt, and she would give him the nourishment of the day. She would actually pack the lunch as well. But as the time passed by, all these things, all the financial conditions actually grew so very sad and so very bad that this man had to borrow food, borrow material from the nearby shop to be able to feed himself, to be able to feed his family. Okay. So the morning we're talking about, he got 6 drumsticks. He carried them in with the sense of triumph. Triumph means victory. Although no one could say precisely who owned the tree, it was his because he lived in its shadow. His wife said, "If you were content with the drumstick leaves alone, I could boil and salt some for you." "Oh, I'm tired of eating these leaves. I have a craving to chew the drumsticks out of sauce, I tell you. You have only 4 teeth in your jaw, but your craving is for big things. All right, get the stuff for the sauce and I will prepare it for you. After all, next year, you may not be alive to ask for anything. But first get me all the stuff, including a measure of rice or millet, and I'll satisfy your holy craving. Our store is empty today. Dal, chili, curry leaves, mustard, coriander, gingerly oil, and 1 large potato. Go out and get all this." He repeated the list after her in order not to miss any item and walked off to the shop in the 3rd street. Muni sat patiently on an upturned packing case below the platform of the shop. The shopman paid no attention to him. Muni kept clearing his throat, coughing and sneezing until the shopman could not stand it anymore and demanded, "What ails you? You'll fly off that seat into a gutter if you sneeze so hard, young man." Muni laughed inordinately in order to please the shopman at being called a young man. This completely won the shopman over. He liked the sense of humor to be appreciated. By thus humoring the shopman, Muni could always ask for 1 or 2 items of food, promising repayment later. Some days the shopman was in good mood and gave in, and sometimes he would lose his temper suddenly and bark at Muni for daring to ask for credit. So children, you see, this man had come down to 2 goats. His financial condition was pathetic. They did not have food to eat, so he would actually live on drumsticks, and drumsticks with salt sprinkled on them every single day. Muni, like any other human would, he also got fed up of these drumsticks. His wife would actually taunt him, for if Muni would ask for something, if he had craving for something, his wife would say that he needs to get a lot of material from the shop. He needs to buy that material. He needs to get it for the house, because the house was empty as far as food was concerned. So if he would get that food, Muni's wife would prepare that. And Muni's wife would actually go on to an extent of saying that this unholy craving of yours is going to die out the next year because you are going to be dead anymore. So he used to actually have to be mocked at, not only by his wife but also by the shopkeeper. Muni would go to the shop, he would sit outside the shop, and he would actually keep coughing and sneezing to gain the attention of the shopkeeper. And what would he get in return? The shopkeeper would actually mock at him, would actually make fun and saying that if you sneeze that hard, you are going to fall into the gutter. Muni would laugh at it inordinately because he wanted to get the food on credit. So at times the shopkeeper would accede to his request when he was in a good mood. The shopkeeper was in a good mood. And at other times when shopkeeper was not in a good mood, he would shoo him away. So that's the way Muni was passing his days, borrowing food items from the shopkeeper. Shopman said, if you could find 5 rupees and a quarter, you will have paid off an ancient debt. How much have you got now? I'll pay you everything on the first of the next month, as always. And whom do you expect to rob by then? Muni felt caught and mumbled, my daughter has sent word that she will be sending the money. Have you a daughter? Sneered the shopman, and she is sending you money? For what purpose, may I know? Birthday? 50th birthday? Said Muni quietly. Birthday? How old are you? Muni repeated weakly, not being sure of it himself. 50. He always calculated his age from the time of the great famine when he stood as high as a parapet around the village well. But who could calculate such things accurately nowadays with so many famines occurring? The shopman felt encouraged when other customers stood around to watch and comment. More likely you are 70, he said to Muni. You also forget that you mentioned a birthday 5 weeks ago when you wanted castor oil for your holy bath. At this, Muni unobtrusively rose and moved off. He later told his wife that scoundrel would not give me anything, so go out and sell the drumsticks for what they are worth. He flung himself down in a corner to recoup from the fatigue of his visit to the shop. His wife said, you are getting no sauce today, nor anything else. I can't find anything to give you to eat. Fast till the evening. It'll be good, do you good. Take the goats and be gone now, she cried and added, don't come back from the sun before the sun is down. Now, children, the shopkeeper would ask for the debt Muni was into. Muni had already actually taken the food worth 5 rupees and a quarter. So Muni was told by the shopkeeper that if he could pay the previous debt, he would be able to get rid of the old debt. Muni would actually promise again, this fake promise of Muni would actually come up again, where he would say that he would pay on the first of the next month, and he would cook a story that his daughter would be sending in the money. Mind it, children, they did not have any child. As always, and of course, the shopkeeper would be able to catch him in his own words. When Muni would be asking for the food, the shopkeeper would ask as to why or for what purpose is your daughter going to send you money. Muni would reply that it was his 50th birthday. And this lie would actually put Muni in trouble further, for he never looked 50, he looked more than 70. And on many occasions he had actually taken money from the shopkeeper on pretext of his birthday, for which his daughter would be sending in the money. So the shopman would actually get to know the lie, the deceit of Muni, and would shoo him away. And Muni would have to actually go away, for he would understand that he was caught in the web of his own words. And he would go later to his wife and he would call that shopman a scoundrel who would not give anything to them, and the wife would actually cry back, would shout back that he would not be getting anything. No sauce would be given to him, and the wife would ask him to go away with the goats and not be seen till evening. He knew that if he obeyed her, she would somehow conjure up some food for him in the evening, only he must be careful not to argue and irritate her. Her temper was undependable in the morning, but improved by the evening time. She was sure to go and work, grind corn in the big house, sweep or scrub somewhere, and earn enough to buy foodstuff and keep a dinner ready for him in the evening. Unleashing the goats from the drumstick tree, Muni started out, driving them ahead and uttering weird cries from time to time in order to urge them on. He passed through the village with his head bowed in thought. He did not want to look at anyone or be accosted. A couple of cronies launching in the temple corridor hailed him, but he ignored their call. The shopman had said that he was 70 at 71, only waited to be summoned by God. When he was dead, what would his wife do? They had lived in each other's company since they were children. He had been told on their day of wedding that he was 10 years old and she was 8. Progeny, none. Perhaps a large progeny would have brought him the blessing of the gods. Only on the outskirts did he lift his head and look up. He urged and bullied the goats until they meandered along to the foot of the horse statue on the edge of the village. He sat on its pedestal for the rest of the day. The advantage of this was that he could watch the highway and see the lorries and buses pass through the hills, and it gave him a sense of belonging to a larger world. The pedestal of the statue was broad enough for him to move around as the sun traveled up and westwards, or he could also crouch under the belly of the horse for shade. Now, children, Muni would not like to argue with his wife because he knew that she was short-tempered, at least especially in the morning. So he had made up his mind that he would not argue with her, and he knew at the back of his mind that if he would leave quietly, his wife would work somewhere, maybe in the big house, and would earn some food for him by evening and would have the food ready by the evening. So Muni would go away, would actually unleash the goats from the tree, and he would from the drumstick tree, and he would shoo them, okay, and he would actually reach near the statue. There was this statue on the outskirts of the village, okay, and Muni, of course, now there's something which has been told about his marriage as well. Muni and his wife were attached to each other since they were children. It was told to Muni that he was 10 years old and his wife was 8 when they got married and when they started living together. So that was the long time period in which they had lived, and they had no progeny. They had perhaps a large progeny would have brought some blessing for them. Progeny means they did not have any children. So maybe at times when the children are there, the God's blessings are showered upon the couple. But they did not have any children. So of course they had been living a pathetic life, a life which was full of poverty, was filled with poverty. Now Muni would reach that particular pedestal of the statue, which was broad enough for him to move around as the sun traveled up. So he would sit under that. He could also crouch under the belly of the horse for shade. So he would sit, he would actually see the lorries. There was this highway which he could actually see from there. He could see the lorries and the buses pass through the hills, and it gave him a sense of belonging to the larger world, because his smaller world was that hut in which he lived, and the larger world was the world which he would actually enjoy sitting under that on the pedestal of that statue. Let's read further. The horse was nearly life-size, molded out of clay, baked, burnt, and brightly colored, and reared its head proudly, prancing its forelegs in the air and flourishing its tail in a loop. Beside the horse stood a warrior with a scythe like mustachios, bulging eyes, and aquiline nose. The horse itself was said to have been as white as the dhobi wash sheet, and had on its back a cover of pure brocade of red and black lace, matching the multicolored sash around the waist of the warrior. But none in the village remembered the splendor, as no one noticed its existence. Even Muni, who spent all his waking hours at its foot, never bothered to look up. It was untouched even by the young vandals of the village, who gashed tree trunks with knives and tried to topple off milestones and inscribed lewd designs on all walls. This statue had been closer to the population of the village at one time when this spot bordered the village. Muni sat at the foot of the statue, watching his 2 goats graze in the arid soil among the cactus and lantana bushes. He looked at the sun. It had tilted westward, no doubt, but it was not the time yet to go back home. If he went too early, his wife would have no food for him. Also, he must give her time to cool off her temper and feel sympathetic. And then she would scrounge and manage to get some food. He noticed now a new sort of vehicle coming down at full speed. It looked like both a motor car and a bus. He used to be intrigued by the novelty of such spectacles, but of late work was going on at the source of the river on the mountain, and an assortment of people and traffic went past him, and he took it all casually and described to his wife later in the day everything he saw. Today, while he observed the yellow vehicle coming down, he was wondering how to describe it later to his wife when it sputtered and stopped in front of him. In this particular reading, we have the description of the horse. We have come to know that the horse was life size. It was made out of clay. It was baked burnt. Okay, it was brightly colored. It had its four legs actually looping in the air. The tail in a loop, kind of a thing. The four legs were in the air. Beside the horse had stood a warrior, and he had bulging eyes. He had mustaches, and he carried. He was curved like an eagle nose. The eyes, the nose we are talking about, the nose was curved like that of an eagle. The horse itself was said to have been as white as Dhobi wash sheets. Okay, we get to know that. And we also get to know that the back of the horse looked like as if it's covered with a pure brocade of red and black laces, matching the multicolored sash around the waist of the warrior. But no one actually remembered as to how the statue came into existence. Even Muni, who had spent his waking hours at its foot, never bothered to look up. It was untouched even by the young Vandals. Vandals are the people who actually are troublesome in the village. They cut the trees with their knives, and they try to topple of the milestones. All that particular vandalism which was done by these Vandals, they did not touch this statue. This statue had been closer to the population of the village at one time when this spot bordered the village. Now it was on the outskirts of the village. So Muni was sitting on the foot of the village, and his two goats were grazing in that soil among the cactus bushes. So he looked at the sun. It had tilted westward, no doubt, but it was not the time for him to actually go back home. If he went too early, first thing, he would not have any food. The wife would not have any food for him. Also, he has to give his wife some time to cool down his temperament and to feel sympathetic towards him. Only then will he be able to actually manage to get some food. So now, when he was sitting over there, he noticed some sort of vehicle which was coming down at full speed. It looked like a car, motor car, as well as a bus. So he was quite intrigued and moved. He used to get mad by seeing something like this, something unfamiliar. Okay, so this spectacle which he saw. So of later, of course, there was this work which was going on at the source of the river on the mountains, and there were these people who would actually pass by. There was a lot of traffic which went past him, and now he would actually look at them casually. He would describe to his wife what he had seen throughout the day when he would sit under that statue, on the pedestal of the statue. So this time when he was sitting over there, he watched and he observed this yellow vehicle coming down. And he was wondering as to how he was going to describe that vehicle as it sputtered, as it produced explosive sound, and it stopped in front of him. Now children, a red-faced foreigner who had been driving it got down and went round it, stooping, looking and poking around the vehicle. Then he straightened himself up, looked at the dashboard, stared in Muni's direction, and approached him. "Excuse me, is there a gas station nearby, or do I have to wait until another car comes?" He suddenly looked up at the clay horse and cried, "Marvelous!" without completing his sentence. Muni felt he should get up and run away, and cursed his age. He could not readily put his limbs into action. The red-faced man wore khaki clothes, evidently a policeman or a soldier. Muni said to himself, "He will chase or shoot if I start running. Some dogs chase only those who run. Oh Shiva, protect me. I don't know why this man should be after me." Meanwhile, the foreigner cried, "Marvelous!" again, nodding his head. He paced around the statue with his eyes fixed on it. Muni sat frozen for a while and then fidgeted and tried to edge away. Now the other man suddenly pressed his palms together and smiled and said, "Namaste, how do you do?" at which Muni spoke the only English expressions he had learnt: yes, no. Having exhausted his English vocabulary, he started in Tamil. My name is Muni, these two goats are mine, and no one can gainsay it. Though our village is full of slanderers these days who will not hesitate to say that what belongs to a man doesn't belong to him. The foreigner faithfully looked in the direction indicated by Muni's fingers, gazed for a while at the two goats and the rocks, and with a puzzled expression took out his silver cigarette case and lit a cigarette. Suddenly remembering the courtesies of the season, he asked, "Do you smoke?" Muni answered, "Yes, no," whereupon the red-faced man took a cigarette and gave it to Muni, who received it with surprise, having had no offer of a smoke from anyone for years now. Children, out of this yellow vehicle came a red-faced foreigner, and he had been driving this yellow vehicle, and he stooped, he looked at his vehicle, he poked under the vehicle, then he straightened himself, and then he actually looked at the dashboard. Then he stared in Muni's direction. Then he found this Muni sitting over there on the pedestal. He asked Muni, "Excuse me, is there a gas station there?" He wanted to fill petrol. So get the petrol filled in his vehicle. Or do I have to wait for another car to come? So suddenly he looked up and he saw at the statue, and he was overawed by the statue, and he cried out, "Marvelous." Muni actually felt a little uncomfortable and he wanted to run away, and he started cursing his limbs, his bones, because he was too old to move. What to talk about running? Okay, so the red-faced man was also wearing khaki clothes, and that actually he looked like a policeman or a soldier. Muni was more so frightened. Okay, and Muni actually started thinking beforehand that this man is going to actually chase me, he's going to shoot me. Okay, so he started praying to Lord Shiva to protect him. The man again cried out, "Marvelous." He paced around the statue with his eyes fixed on it. Muni sat frozen for a while and then fidgeted and tried to edge away. Muni tried to actually edge away from that man. Now the other man again addressed Muni. He folded his hands and he said, "Namaste. How are you?" Muni did not know English except for the two words yes and no, and that's what he spoke. He said yes, no. And then after he had exhausted his English vocabulary, he had only two words in his vocabulary. He started in Tamil. He introduced himself. He said, "I am Muni, and these goats," he pointed in the direction of the goats. He said, "These goats are mine. No one can deny that they are mine, though of course we are living in the time where people actually start claiming those things which are not theirs. But I can guarantee that these two goats are mine." He wanted to actually pacify the foreigner, thinking him to be a policeman or a military man. He wanted to pacify him that he is a genuine human being. The foreigner looked in the direction of Muni's fingers, and he gazed at the goats, and he was quite puzzled. He had a puzzled expression because he did not understand as to why Muni was pointing towards the goats. Suddenly remembering the courtesy, the foreigner actually took out the cigarette and he offered the cigarette to Muni. He asked Muni if he smoked. He took out a cigarette and he gave it to Muni, wherein Muni received it with a lot of surprise because he had never been offered a smoke for such a long time now. For so many years he had not been offered to smoke by anybody in the village. "Sure you know why this horse was made," said the red man, and smiled ingratiatingly. Ingratiatingly means in a way of getting approval. Muni reacted to the relaxed atmosphere by smiling himself and pleaded, "Please go away, sir. I know nothing. I promise we will hold him for you if we see any bad character around, and we will bury him up to his neck in a coconut pit if he tries to escape. But our village has always had a clean record. Must definitely be the other village." Now the red man implored, Please, I'll speak slowly. Please try to understand me. Can't you understand even a simple word of English? Everyone in this country seems to know English. I've gotten along with English everywhere in this country, but you don't speak it. Have you any religious or spiritual scruples against English speech? Muni made some indistinct sounds in his throat and shook his head. Encouraged, the other went on to explain at length, uttering each syllable with care and deliberation. Presently, he sidled over and took a seat beside the old man, explaining, "You see, last August, we probably had the hottest summer in history, and I was working in the sleeves in my office on the 40th floor of the Empire State Building. We had a power failure one day, and there I was stuck for 4 hours. No elevator, no air conditioning. All the way in the train, I kept thinking, and the minute I reached home in Connecticut, I told my wife, Ruth, we will visit India this winter. It's time to look at other civilization." Next day, she called the travel agent first thing and told him to fix it, and so here I am. Ruth came with me but is staying back at Srinagar, and I am the one doing the rounds and joining her later. So, children, Muni was speaking something else altogether, and the foreigner was thinking and talking altogether a different issue. So, Muni reacted in a very smiling way when he asked about the horse. Muni did not understand that this man was asking about the horse. So Muni asked that man to go away. He said that he promised that he would be able to find, if he is able to find the culprit of the murder, he would catch hold of that person and would hand it over to him. The red man was trying to implore from Muni as to why he was not able to understand a single word. So he even suggested that he would go very slow in his speech for him to understand. And then he checked it out. He was wondering, this foreigner was wondering that in India, he has come across so many people and all of them at least understand English. It was the first time that he had come across a person who did not understand English. So he checked out with the old man, said, did he have any kind of spiritual doubts against English speech? The man Muni shook his head. And the shaking of the head actually kind of encouraged the foreigner, and he sat by him. And he started telling his story as to how he reached India. He said it was hot summer in the history, and he was working in the shirt sleeves in his office in the Empire State Building when there was sudden power failure, and he was stuck for 4 hours with no elevator and no air conditioning. And that was something which actually gave him a revelation that he should visit those civilizations where there is poverty, there is no electricity. Next day, he called the travel agent, his wife called the travel agent, and they fixed it up. And that's how Ruth and this foreigner, Ruth was the name of the wife of the foreigner, and this foreigner actually visited India. And Ruth, who was the wife of the foreigners, he stayed back in Srinagar, and this man was going around taking the rounds, and he would join her later. Muni looked reflective at the end of this long oration and said, rather feebly, yes, no, as a concession to the other's language, and went on in Tamil. When I was this high, he indicated a foot high, I had heard my uncle say. No one can tell what he was planning to say, as the other interrupted him at this stage to ask, boy, what is the secret of your teeth? How old are you? Muni forgot what he had started to say and remarked, sometimes we too lose our cattle. Jackals or cheetahs may sometimes carry them off, but sometimes it's just theft from over in the next village, and then we will know who has done it. Our priest at the temple can see in the camphor flame the face of the thief, and when he is caught, he gestured with his hands a perfect mincing of meat. The American watched his hands intently and said, I know what you mean. Chop something. Maybe I'm holding you up and you want to chop wood. Where is your axe? Hand it to me and show me what to chop. I do enjoy it, just a hobby. We get a lot of driftwood along the backwater near my house, and on Sundays I do nothing but chop wood for the fireplace. I really feel different when I watch the fire in the fireplace. Although it may take all the sections of Sunday New York Times to get a fire started, and he smiled at his reference. Muni felt totally confused but decided the best thing would be to make an attempt to get away from this place. He tried to edge out, saying, must go home, and turned to go. The other seized his shoulder and said desperately, is there no one, absolutely no one here to translate for me? He looked up and down the road, which was deserted in this hot afternoon. The stranger almost pinioned Muni's back to the statue and asked, "Isn't this statue yours? Why don't you sell it to me?" Now, children, look at the confusion prevailing here because they did not understand each other's language. Muni could speak only Tamil and the man could speak English. Muni looked quite reflected, and of course he would speak only two words, yes and no, as concession to the other's language in between, and more so he was talking in Tamil. He started with a conversation with that man, the foreigner. He said when he was that high, and he indicated a foot high. And I had heard my uncle say, and then he was interrupted by the foreigner who said, "What is the secret of your teeth?" Because the foreigner liked the teeth of Muni. "How old are you?" Muni forgot what he had to say and he started off something else. He said, "We normally lose our cattle in jackals and cheetahs. Jackals and cheetahs actually take away our cattle, and sometimes there is theft from the other village. And then the priest of the temple, then he finds the thief in the camphor flame, and he is able to actually help to get the thief caught." So he gestured all this with his hands, a perfect mincing of the meat, as if you're chopping the meat. So the American for the first time was able to at least understand the gesture of Muni. He said, "I can understand that you're trying to chop, you're trying to tell me that you want to chop something." But he was not able to understand fully as to what Muni was trying to say. He said, "Where is your axe? What do you want to chop? Do you want to chop wood, and am I holding you?" So the man replied, and he said that he is interested in chopping the wood, so if he can be given the axe. So he said on Sundays he does this. He chopped the wood for the fireplace. He says he feels really different when he watches the fire in the fireplace, although it may take all the sections of the New York Times to get a fire started. And he smiled at this reference. Now, basically, the foreigner is trying to actually explain and trying to implore what Muni was trying to say, but then he has a different notion to what he has seen Muni doing. Mincing, like seeing the gesture of Muni where he was showing as if he was mincing something. Now, Muni wants to get rid of this place. He wants to leave this place. So he says, "I must go home." So when he was trying to go away, Muni was held by the shoulder by this man, and then the man could looked quite desperate. He wanted Muni to have a translator who would translate foreigners' words for Muni. He looked up and down the road, and there was no one. It was deserted. Okay, it was the afternoon, hot afternoon, and there was no one over there. So he actually held Muni, and he even pinioned Muni back to the statue and asked Muni, does that statue belong to Muni? And would Muni sell it to him? Okay, so that's basically what he's asking Muni now, which of course Muni will not be able to understand again. Children, we are halfway through this particular short story. The second half, that is the conclusion of the story, will be done in my next video, after which we will do the title justification of the story, the theme, and the critical analysis of the story. And I'll also give you a reference to the context, which will be done by you in your fair notebooks of literature and English. Till then, goodbye, stay safe and stay happy.